Let us now call upon Mr. Charles Dickens, the celebrated novelist, to present some extracts from his work for our edification and education as we open the English file.
And now, for one performance only, Mr. Dickens, the celebrated novelist, presents for the edification and entertainment of the young people currently residing in Her Majesty's kingdom, several diverting extracts from his works, which will be performed by various talented members of the theatrical profession. The widow Mrs. Corney, matron of the workhouse, receives on a cold winter's night an official visit from the parish beadle, Mr. Bumble.
Your servant, ma'am. Shall I shut the door, ma'am?
Oh, hard weather, Mr. Bumble.
Oh, hard indeed, ma'am. This is the port wine, ma'am, that the board ordered for the infirmary. Fresh, genuine port wine, only out of the cask this forenoon, as clear as a bell, and no sediment.
You'll have a very cold walk, Mr. Bumble.
It blows, ma'am, enough to cut one's ears off.
Won't you take a cup of tea?
Why, thank you, ma'am.
Sweet, Mr. Bumble?
Very sweet indeed, ma'am. You have a cat, I see, Mrs. Corney. And kittens, too, I declare.
Oh, I'm so fond of them, Mr. Bumble, you can't think. They're so happy, so frolicsome and so cheerful that they're quite companions for me.
Very nice animals, ma'am. So very domestic.
Oh, yes. And very fond of their home, too, that it's quite a pleasure, I'm sure.
I mean to say this, ma'am. If there any cat or kitten that lived with you and was not fond of its own, ma'am, must be an ass.
Oh, Mr. Bumble.
It's no use disguising the facts, ma'am. I would drown it myself with pleasure.
Then you're a very cruel man, and a very hard-hearted man besides.
Hard-hearted, ma'am. Hard. Are you hard-hearted, Mrs. Corney?
What a very curious question from a single man. What can you want to know for, Mr. Bumble? Mr. Bumble. Mr. Bumble, I shall scream. Who's there?
If you please, mistress, old Sally's a-going fast.
Oh, well, what's that to me? I can't keep her alive, can I?
No, mistress, nobody can. But she's troubled in her mind. She says she's got something to tell. She'll never die till you come, mistress.
Mrs. Corney muffled herself in her thick shawl, which she hastily caught up, and briefly requested Mr. Bumble to stay till she came back, lest anything particular should occur. Bidding the messenger walk fast and not be all night hobbling up the stairs, she followed her from the room with a very ill grace, scolding all the way. Mr. Bumble's conduct, on being left to himself, was rather inexplicable. He opened the closet, counted the teaspoons, weighed the sugar tongs, closely inspected the silver milk pot to ascertain that it was of the genuine metal, and having satisfied his curiosity on all these points, put on his cocked hat cornerwise, and danced, with much gravity, 4 distinct times round the table. Having gone through this very extraordinary performance, he took off the cocked hat again, and, spreading himself before the fire with his back towards it, seemed to be mentally engaged in taking an exact inventory of the furniture. Let us leave the amorous Mr. Bumble, undisturbed by the imminent death of the woman pauper in Mrs. Corney's care, to the joyful contemplation of his future wealth and possible happiness, should his courtship prove successful. Allow me now to introduce you to a yet more colourful and flamboyant gentleman. A gentleman who has devoted his life and that of his family to that noble calling, the theatre. Mr. Vincent Crummles, actor, manager, impresario extraordinary, is one of a multitude of characters encountered by Nicholas Nickleby, the hero of my next novel. On the occasion of their meeting, Nicholas, a well-brought-up but penniless young gentleman, is tramping his way to Portsmouth in the hope of finding work on board ship. He encounters Mr. Crummles in a public house, where the company has been rehearsing in the back rooms. Mr. Crummles listens patiently to Nicholas's plans, and then makes his own suggestion.
Does no other profession occur to you, which a young man of your figure and address might take to easily and see the world to advantage in?
No.
Why, then I'll tell you one. The stage.
The stage?
The theatrical profession. I am in the theatrical profession myself. My wife is in the theatrical profession. My children are in the theatrical profession. I had a dog that lived and died in it from a puppy. And my chaise pony goes on in Timur the Tartar.
Your pony?
Yes, of course. He's quite one of us. His mother was on the stage.
Your pony's mother?
Yes, she ate apple pie at a circus for upward of 14 years. Fired pistols, went to bed in a nightcap, and in short took the low comedy entirely. His father was a dancer.
Was he at all distinguished?
Not very. He was rather a low sort of a pony. When the mother died, he took the port wine business.
Your pony, the port wine business?
Drinking port wine with the clown. But he was greedy. One night he bit off the bowl of the glass and choked himself, so that his vulgarity was the death of him at last. Still, let us return to your prospects. I'll bring you out. Say the word. I want a novelty.
I don't know anything about it. I never acted a part in my life, except at school.
There's genteel comedy in your walk and manner, juvenile tragedy in your eye, and touch-and-go farce in your laugh. You'll do as well as if you'd thought of nothing but the lamps from your birth downwards.
Well,
You could be useful to us in 100 ways. Think what capital bills a man of your education could write for the shop windows.
well, I think I could manage that department.
To be sure you could. For further particulars, see small handbills. We might have half a volume in every one of them. Pieces, too. You could write us a piece which would bring out the whole strength of the company whenever we wanted one.
I am not quite so confident about that. But I dare say I could scribble you something now and then that would suit you.
Now, we shall have a new showpiece out directly. Let me see. Peculiar resources of this establishment. New and splendid scenery. You must arrange to introduce a real pump and 2 washing tubs.
Into the piece?
Yes. I bought them cheap at a sale the other day, and they'll come in admirably. That's the London plan. They look up a few dresses and properties and write a piece to fit them. Most of the theatres have an author on purpose.
Indeed?
Oh, yes, it's a common thing. It'll look very well in the bills, in separate lines. Real pump, splendid tubs, great attraction. You don't happen to be anything of an artist, do you?
That is not one of my accomplishments.
Ah, then it can't be helped. If you had been, we might have had a large woodcut of the last scene for the posters, showing the whole depth of the stage, with the pump and the tubs in the middle of it. But however, if you're not, then it can't be helped.
What should I get from all this? Could I live by it?
Live by it like a prince, with your own salary and your friends and your writings. You'd make £1 a week.
You don't say so.
I certainly do. And if we had a run of good houses, more than double the money.
Done. Let me have your hand on it.
And so our hero took his place in the world of popular entertainment. But, as we all know, of course, there is and always was more to life than the tinsel and glitter of the stage. There is the hard, real world of industry and factories. As I grew older, I saw the country change enormously. The railways were built. Our cities became far larger, and great new factory towns grew up where once there may only have been tiny villages. I visited one such town, Preston, when it was at the center of a bitter strike in the cotton industry. And subsequently, I wrote a novel, Hard Times, set in Coketown, a place and name of my own invention, but one based on my knowledge of the conditions in these new factory towns. One aspect of these towns was the schools. Most people agreed that the children in these new towns needed an education. But what sort of an education were they being offered? Let us visit the school from Hard Times and meet a gentleman with a quite clear philosophy.
Thomas Gradgrind, sir, a man of realities, a man of fact and calculation, a man who proceeds upon the principle that 2 and 2 are 4 and nothing over, and is not to be talked into allowing for anything over. Thomas Gradgrind, sir, peremptorily Thomas Gradgrind, with a rule and a pair of scales and a multiplication table always in his pocket, sir, ready to weigh and measure any parcel of human nature and tell you exactly what it comes to. It is a mere question of figures, a case of simple arithmetic. You may hope to get some other nonsensical belief into the head of George Gradgrind or Augustus Gradgrind or John Gradgrind or Joseph Gradgrind, all supposititious, non-existent persons, but into the head of Thomas Gradgrind. No, sir.
In such terms, Mr. Gradgrind always mentally introduced himself, whether to his private circle of acquaintance or to the public in general. In such terms, no doubt substituting boys and girls for sir, Thomas Gradgrind now presented Thomas Gradgrind to the little pitchers before him, who were to be filled so full of facts. One newly arrived little pitcher was girl number 20, Sissy Jupe.
Girl number 20. I don't know that girl. Who is that girl?
Sissy Jupe, sir.
Sissy's not a name. Don't call yourself Sissy. Call yourself Cecilia.
It's father as calls me Sissy, sir.
Well, then, he has no business to do it. Tell him he mustn't. Cecilia Jupe. Let me see. What is your father?
He belongs to the horse riding, if you please, sir.
We don't want to know anything about that here. You mustn't tell us anything about that here. Your father breaks horses, don't he?
If you please, sir, when they can get any to break, they do break horses in the ring, sir.
You mustn't tell us anything about the ring here. Very well, then. Describe your father as a horse breaker. He doctors sick horses, I dare say?
Oh, yes, sir.
Very well, then. Your father is a veterinary surgeon, a farrier, and a horse breaker. Give me your definition of a horse. Girl number 20, unable to define a horse. Girl number 20, in possession of no facts in reference to one of the commonest of animals. Some boy's definition of a horse. Bitzer, yours. Bitzer, your definition of a horse.
Quadruped, graminivorous, 40 teeth, namely 24 grinders, 4 eye teeth and 12 incisive. Sheds coat in the spring. In marsh countries, sheds hoofs too. Hoofs hard but requiring to be shod with iron. Age known by marks in mouth.
Now, girl number 20, you know what a horse is.
This is a government officer, a commissioner, always fit and ready with a system to force down the public's throat. He can take on common sense and knock it out cold, and is always raring to fight for the day when government commissioners shall reign upon earth.
Very well. That's a horse. Now let me ask you, girls and boys, suppose you were going to carpet a room. Would you use a carpet having a representation of flowers upon it?
Oh, yes, sir.
Girl number 20. So you would carpet a room, or your husband's room, if you were a grown woman and had a husband, with representations of flowers, would you? Why would you?
If you please, sir, I'm very fond of flowers.
And is that why you would set down table and chairs upon them and have people walking over them with heavy boots?
Oh, it wouldn't hurt them, sir. They wouldn't crush or wither, if you please, sir. There would be pictures of what was very pretty and pleasant, and I would fancy that anyone...
Aye, but you mustn't fancy. That's it. You are never to fancy.
You are not Cecilia Jupe to do anything of that kind.
Fact, fact, fact.
Fact, fact, fact.
You are to be in all things regulated and governed by fact. We hope to have, before long, a board of fact composed of commissioners of fact and nothing but fact. You are to discard the word fancy altogether. You have nothing to do with it. You are not to have in any object of use or ornament what would be a contradiction in fact. You don't walk upon flowers in fact. You cannot be allowed to walk upon flowers in carpets. You don't find that foreign birds and butterflies come and perch upon your crockery. You cannot be permitted to paint foreign birds and butterflies upon your crockery. You don't meet with quadrupeds going up and down walls. You mustn't have quadrupeds represented upon walls. You must use for all these purposes combinations and modifications in primary colours of mathematical figures which are susceptible of proof and demonstration. This is the new discovery. Now, this is fact. This is taste. Now, if Mr. Choakumchild will proceed to give his first lesson here, Mr. Gradgrind, I shall be happy, at your request, to observe his mode of procedure.
Mr. Choakumchild, we only wait for you.
Another scene now, and a very different sort of childhood, taking place in a very different sort of school. Dr. Blimber's Academy, a boarding school for the sons of gentlemen that features in my novel, Dombey and Son. Young Paul Dombey is a very sickly little boy, and the not-so-young Toots has been permanently damaged by excessive schooling by Dr. Blimber and his staff.
The rather odd young man and the sickly Dombey, both lonely and unhappy despite their wealth, form an unlikely alliance. Here is young Toots. People say that Dr. Blimber rather overdid things with him. and that when he began to have whiskers, he left off having brains. He has the gruffest of voices and the shrillest of minds. When he is not secretly putting ornamental pins in his shirt or a ring on his little finger, he spends his time falling in love with nursery maids who have no idea of his existence, or staring out of the window after bedtime like a greatly overgrown cherub. He now pursues his own course of study, which is chiefly to write long letters to himself from persons of distinction, which he preserves in his desk with great care. On the evening of Paul's arrival, the two of them find themselves waiting to go into dinner.
You must be Dombey.
Yes, sir.
My name's Toots. Sit down, Dombey.
Thank you, sir.
You're a very small chap.
Yes, sir. I'm small. Thank you, sir.
Who's your tailor?
It's the woman that has made my clothes as yet. My sister's dressmaker.
My tailor's Burgess & Co. Fashionable, but very dear. Your father's regularly rich, ain't he?
Yes, sir. He's Dombey and Son.
And which?
And Son, sir.
Mention the name again tomorrow, would you? It's rather important.
Toots' purpose is nothing less than writing himself a private and confidential letter from Dombey and Son immediately. A few days later, after writing himself an important letter from the Duke of Wellington, Toots seeks out Paul's company again.
Are you fond of waistcoats?
Yes, sir.
So am I.
In the main, Paul lived a solitary life at Dr. Blimber's, where he spent much time reading and thinking about his sister, Florence, from whom he had been suddenly separated by being sent to the school. His mother had died at his birth. Dombey Sr. was a very cold man, and Paul missed Florence greatly. Nonetheless, he found new comfort each day from the quietly developing friendship with the letter-writing Toots.
I say, what do you think about?
Oh, I think about a great many things.
Do you, though?
If you had to die, don't you think you'd rather die on a moonlight night when the sky was quite clear and the wind blowing, as it did last night?
I don't know about that.
Not blowing, at least, but sounding in the air like the sea sounds in the shells. It was a beautiful night. Once I'd listened to the water for a long time, I got up and looked out. There's a boat over there in the full light of the moon. A boat with a sail.
Smugglers. Or preventive.
A boat with a sail in the full light of the moon. A sail like an arm, all silver. And what do you think it seemed to do as it moved with the waves?
Pitch.
Beckon. It seemed to beckon me to come. There she is, there she is.
Who?
My sister Florence, looking up here and waving her hand. She sees me, she sees me. Good night, dear, good night.
Let us leave Paul and Toots at Dr. Blimber's and meet a young lad leading a very different type of life. I wrote the novel Great Expectations entirely through the eyes of a young boy as he grows up from childhood to manhood. The boy was Pip, an orphan brought up by his grown-up sister and her husband, Joe Gargery, the blacksmith.
Let Pip tell his own story from his seat at the Christmas dinner table where his sister and brother-in-law are entertaining relatives and friends to the festive meal. Despite the holiday spirit, the boy finds few friendly faces around the table, apart from the ever-reliable Mr. Joe. grave and deep-voiced church clerk, Mr. Wopsle, the leathery old wheelwright, Mr. Hubble, and his sharp-eyed wife, Mrs. Hubble, his sister, Mrs. Joe herself, and hard-breathing Uncle Pumblechook, a regular array of adults, intent, it seems, even on this day, on persecuting young Pip.
I would not have minded being squeezed in at a cute angle of the table, with the table in my chest, and the Pumblechook elbow in my eye. Nor would I have been minded not being allowed to speak. I didn't want to speak. Nor would I have minded being given the scaly tips of the drumsticks of the fowls, or those obscure corners of pork. I should not have minded any of this if they had only left me alone, but they seemed to think the opportunity lost if they failed to point the conversation at me every now and then, and stick the point into me. It began the moment we sat down to dinner.
Mr. Wopsle said grace, and ended with the hope that we might be truly grateful.
May we be truly grateful.
Amen.
Oh, amen.
You hear that? Truly grateful.
Especially be grateful, boy, to them which bring you up by hand.
Why is it that the young are never grateful?
Naturally vicious.
True.
True.
Joe usually aided and comforted me at dinner times by giving me the gravy. There being plenty of gravy today, Joe spooned it onto my plate at this point, about half a pint.
Not much of a sermon when you think about it. If only the church were thrown open, I'd give you a sermon all right. And the subject? Why pick on that subject when there are so many good uns going about?
True again. You've hit it, sir. Plenty of subjects going about for them that know how to put salt on their tails. That's what's wanted. A man needn't go far to find a subject if he's ready with his salt box. Look at pork alone. Now, there's a subject. If you want a subject, look at pork.
True, sir. Many a moral for the young might be deduced from that text.
You listen to this.
Swine were the companions of the prodigal. The gluttony of swine is put before us as an example to the young.
True.
What is detestable in a pig is even more detestable in a boy.
Or girl.
Of course, or girl, Mr. Hubble, but there is no girl here at present.
Besides, think what you've got to be grateful for. If you'd been born a squeaker.
Oh, he was. If ever a child was.
I mean a 4-footed squeaker. If he'd been born such, would you be here now? No, not you.
Unless it be in that form?
I do not mean in that form, sir. I mean enjoying himself with his elders and betters and improving himself with their conversation and rolling in the lap of luxury. Would he have been doing that, sir? No, he wouldn't. And what would have been your destination? You would have been sold for so many shillings according to the market price of the article. And Dunstable the butcher would have crept up to you as you lay in your straw, and he would have whipped you under his left arm, and with his right he would have tucked his frock to get his penknife out of his waistcoat pocket, and he would have had your life and shed your blood. No bringing up by hand then. Not a bit of it.
He was a world of trouble to you, Ma'am.
Trouble? Trouble? You wouldn't believe me, you really wouldn't. Not a word of gratitude out of him we ever get. And me bringing him up by hands. If he hasn't got diphtheria, he's got the mumps.
My sister then entered on a fearful catalogue of all the illnesses I had been guilty of, and all the acts of sleeplessness I had committed, and all the high places I had tumbled from.
And all the low places I had tumbled into, and all the injuries I had done myself, and all the times she had wished me in my grave. And I had contumaciously refused to go there.
order form for the teacher.